Hi, and welcome to Homebrew Podcast. I'm Danny.
And I'm Johna. We're two pagan friends exploring spirituality in the modern age.
We're queer.
And definitely not so white.
So please be aware that we are grown-ups who may discuss sensitive topics as they relate to our own experiences.
That being said, we welcome and incorporate the experiences of our listeners. You can contribute by messaging homebrewpodcast.tumblr.com.
Or by tagging @homebrewpagans on Twitter. And so, let's get into the episode. All right, so today we are having a special hero cultist to open up our episode called Remembering Christopher Tolkien.
The main topic is going to be New Year's resolutions.
The myth today is going to be an Aztec creation myth in 2 parts.
And John is going to wrap it up with a devotional thought.
So this hero cultist, we are remembering Christopher Tolkien. As some of you may know, Christopher Tolkien was the son of J.R.R. Tolkien, the creator of Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit of Middle-earth fame. Christopher Tolkien died January 16th, 2020. He was 95 years old. Many people credit Christopher Tolkien for the compilation of works that make the Silmarillion, which is if a history book met the King James Bible and talked about Middle-earth before the events of the Lord of the Rings. And he has been called the steward of Middle-earth. He ensured that his father's work was treated as literature. He is the spearhead of the Tolkien estate, or he was, which dictated what could or could not be used of Tolkien, J.R.R. Tolkien's works in terms of adaptations or add-ons. He also is known as a mean old man in some circles.
Yeah, you know what? He did have a reputation as kind of a curmudgeon. That's because as much as he wanted everyone to invest their money in The Lord of the Rings, he wanted people to celebrate J.R.R. Tolkien's works, sure, but he did not want anyone to be particularly inspired by that. They especially tried to discourage competitive literature in the same vein. They expressly discouraged fan fiction and stuff like that. Basically, anything creative inspired by Middle-earth had run the risk of coming under fire from the Tolkien estate through Christopher Tolkien, who was after the dollars. I mean, pretty much.
Well, we gotta be real here. The dollars are what makes things happen, and he knew that. It feels like a bit of an overstatement to compare him to Anne Rice, who was almost as famous for her lawsuits against fan fiction writers as she was for her novels on gay vampires.
Oh my God.
Come at me, Anne Rice. Don't come at me, Anne Rice.
No, please don't.
Oh, God.
But, I mean, as much as it is frustrating to, think about how much Christopher Tolkien criticized Lord of the Rings fans, we also have him to thank for the material that we do have and love. Mm-hmm. So, with that, we raise up our voices to Christopher Tolkien, and in his honor, we will write and rewrite a zillion super gay Lord of the Rings AUs that will definitely offend him, and we're going to leave reviews for all of the terrible, sordid, whack-ass fanfics on AO3. Thank you, Chris. Fuck off.
Fuck off, buddy. Rest in fucking peace. Take us to the main topic, Johna. Let's talk about resolutions.
Okay, so it's finally the end of January, heading into February. So the season of shitty New Year's resolutions should be over now. The resolution police should have met their quota. They should be back in their cars and headed to the station. So now that January is behind us, I'd actually like to start the real work. Today, we are going to dig into real goal setting that actually works. I'm sure I don't have to educate you on the tradition of New Year's resolutions. Because, most of us come fresh out of these midnight parties, and we get to dreaming about our fantasy selves that set crazy goals, just like everybody else. However, U.S. News and World Report puts the New Year's resolution failure rate at about 80%, which I feel is actually a little generous considering the self-reporting. With many New Year's goals, January goals, destined for failure, we are inviting you to join us in making February your auspicious goal-setting month.
So, goal setting. Goal setting looks a little different if you're disabled. It goes without saying that chronic illness can affect every aspect of a person's life. Both, for example, both Johna and I are chronically ill in different ways, and it affects our lives differently, but it does affect pretty much every portion of our lives. But for myself, I find that the thing that most impacts my goal setting is the unpredictability of my chronic illness. So, for example, I would love to make like a really standard classic New Year's goal of eat better, which usually involves eating less simple sugars and complex carbohydrates, eating more greens, eating more protein, etc. In 2019 alone, I discovered 4 new food allergies or intolerances or sensitivities. The jury's kind of out on which ones those are, and they included things like bell peppers, red onion. There's another one that was like some other vegetable. These are things that aren't like, oh yeah, obviously you shouldn't eat like a giant cake. But it's also like, also, Dan, you can't have too much leafy greens or your insides will riot. And these happen fairly quickly. I can't really plan for that. And also the advice that I would get from a nutritionist or even more simply like a wellness app would not sometimes be useful for me because the baseline research that they will present to me assumes that my insides work, and they just don't. So, all that being said, how does a disabled person plan smart for a better goal-setting month this February?
That's a lot.
It is a lot.
That's a lot. That's like stuff that some stuff you can plan for, some stuff you actually can't. But I think a good way to conceptualize this is using the Two of Wands, which is a tarot card. I think the Two of Wands is a great representation of who we become, where our heads are at when we think earnestly about goal setting. I mean, the Ace of Wands, the first one in the suit, encapsulates ambition and enterprising spirit, but the next step is directing that energy and actually making your plan. Effective goal setting always happens on at least 2 levels. You're going to have the personal and immediate level versus the broad, overreaching, and long-term. So we consider the Two of Wands. Traditionally, a young merchant stands overlooking the bay as they wait for their far-off ships while holding an orb, which is sometimes depicted as a globe, in their hand. That orb can be a symbol of the wealth that the merchant is capable of, no matter how much it needs to be scaled down in order for them to comfortably hold it in their hand. And the merchant keeps that symbol close to them as they direct their gaze to the far-off waters, knowing what they expect to come, even if it's not immediately in sight. The last element usually depicted is the castle balcony where the merchant finds their view. When we're looking at the traditional image, it can be easy to take those plain-looking bricks for granted, but I'd like you to think about the steps they took to make that climb, the things they did that they might not think are worth mentioning, but ultimately brought them to that point. As pagans and as people willing to affect change in our world, it's important to make sure that our big goals, our small goals, and our even smaller steps are united in the same mission. And that's what makes the resolution stick.
So, one of the things I really liked in what you just said, Johna, is the splitting into like 3 sections of like a standard resolution process. Big goals, small goals, and our even smaller steps. And I think that goes really underappreciated. And I do want to kind of bring an example into this as a goal that I set that did not work out. Because along with some extenuating factors, I did not split this like fairly big goal into small goals and small steps. And I know we're going to talk about what small steps and small goals look like and how they're different. But a few years ago, before I got quite ill, I had the New Year's resolution to finish a work-in-progress novel and publish it by the end of the year. I very handily did not do either of those things. For, a couple of extenuating circumstances happened. My chronic illness happened to me for pretty much the first time ever that year. And that was exacerbated by my mental illness, which then in turn exacerbated my chronic illness in that cycle, in a way that I'd never really experienced before. But I feel like I could have managed these new frameworks if I had been able to split my big goal into smaller and even smaller pieces. And the concept of doing that seems like it makes things, it like muddies the waters, it adds more steps where it doesn't need to be, but it's almost like tiny, tiny contingency plans. If I can't finish a work-in-progress novel, maybe I can write like a really detailed, finished outline That's different than the one that I start with. If I finish the novel but don't feel like I can publish it, maybe I can send it out to editors just for some review. I know a couple of writers in like editing circles that would have done that for me. But because I didn't know how to manage these new frameworks, and because I didn't have these smaller steps, I couldn't adjust my goal, and so I just gave up.
Oh, shit. No. Okay, my dude. That was an awesome goal to set for yourself. It fucking sucks that shit you had no control over wiped out what felt like a manageable goal. And I hate that this felt like a big-ass failure because you had accomplished so much before that illness, and you went on to accomplish even more good shit after that illness. But the pass or fail way that this goal was set up, which is the way most people shape their New Year's resolutions, it had warped this awesome and cool goal into somehow letting yourself down when really there just wasn't enough room to reflect your progress.
Yeah, absolutely.
So when it comes to your goals and long-term goals, they do have to be tied to larger themes, specifically things that don't have a deadline, that you care deeply about, that you'll continue to care deeply about, whether or not you have that goal. And you use that to anchor your much, much smaller stepwise goals in order to be successful. So, I'm going to give you an example. Johna wants to be a psychic warrior ghost hunter.
Hell yeah.
Right? Okay. So that's my overarching theme, right? Johna wants to devote her entire life to fighting ghosts. My big goal, my year goal, is to be able to deliver ghost punches or ghost hugs. Ghost sympathy.
Oh, ghost hugs!
Right? What do I mean by that? I mean that I gotta, discern when I'm being threatened versus a spirit just getting my attention. That means I wanna, have reliable shielding or grounding techniques, right? So, of course I can break that down smaller, right? I set my small goals, which is Johna's gotta talk to more and different kinds of spirits. Johna's gotta have, fluid ghost jujitsu. So I have my small goals, talking to ghosts, improving my ghost jitsu. I've decided that these are part of the bigger goal of becoming a ghost puncher. Basically, my Two of Swords merchant has the orb in their hand. They've cast their gaze out to the sea, but where is my castle balcony? Like, what are the steps I'm already taking? That's actually where the real work happens. I want to break the small goal into even smaller steps and do it in a way that reflects my flow of progress, not just a pass or fail checkmark. One way that I could do that is to give myself a month of observation. Super important. I keep a chart that only shows the days that I already practice energy work. Maybe I'll stay mindful of the time of day that it happens. After just watching, just keeping track of it, then I take maybe 2 to 4 weeks. I deliberately increase that time I put in, little by little. Experiment with where I actually enjoy adding that time. See where I can start changing my weaknesses. And then at that point, when I've spent more time observing my own habits, I can set a loftier goal and feel way more confident about being able to pull it off. If you start on your New Year's resolution January 1st, January 2nd, expecting big changes, that doesn't give you enough time to get comfortable with yourself as you are. It doesn't give you enough time to think about how that goal is impacted by things like illness, of flare-ups, of, small crises that you still have to respond to, taking your friend to the hospital, or maybe your kids have a sick day. That stuff's important, and that stuff doesn't mean that you're already failing. It just means that you need to incorporate it in the plan that you already have.
Hell yeah. No, I like this episode, and I think I said this before, because I am also getting real life tangible advice on goal setting, because that's something that I feel well enough to try again this year. And I think of the concept that I want to highlight from what you said, because there's a lot of good stuff in there, is the concept of a goal as like a pass or fail check mark. That concept is pretty common. I think, in my opinion, that people set up a goal as pass fail because they think that's the simplest way to do it. You either do it or you don't. But I think it is an unhelpful way to simplify your resolution. I think that when you set up something as pass fail, it disguises your half steps, the little things you have to do to get to the big goal, as failures. You're doing something that is not reaching your goal. It is not worth it. It is a failure, etc., etc. These kinds of things are huge in making sure that you do not accomplish your goal. And this is something I learned from a food tracker app, believe it or not. And I know I just said I don't really use those because I have too many food allergies, but it was part of this like wellness app that I downloaded for like a free trial. And it was pretty unremarkable. But one of the things that I liked about it was that it had sections about like wellness psychology or something. It sounded kind of cheesy and a lot of it was kind of unhelpful. But one of the things I thought was really interesting was that to better your chance of succeeding, you must allow yourself an option of fucking it up. Because everybody's gonna fuck it up. You're gonna fuck up your resolution no matter how much you want to do it because life happens. Like Johna said, your kids get sick. You have to take your friend to a hospital. You get sick. You lose your job. You get a new job. Your schedule's all wacky. These variables you cannot control for create the potential of setbacks. They do not create the potential of failure. Because one of the things that was highlighted in this app is the psychology of failure versus success. And how if you fixate on this failure versus success, this pass fail, this like one or other mode, I guess, of creating goals, it creates something that's called a thought distortion, which is pretty much what it says on the tin. It is your perception of an event or events that is not actually true to what is going on actually in real life. If you're someone like me, you will often fall into the trap of black or white thinking, where not meeting a goal feels like an absolute failure, and so you should just stop. And to be completely honest, because I know there are people who know me who are listening to this, I have not ever really solved this problem 100%. I still do black and white thinking. I still frame a lot of endeavors as failure versus success. I've abandoned a lot of goals because I didn't immediately reach them and I gave up because I felt like I had put in enough time and I should get returns, and that's how it is. And that's a shame. But I also know that I do it so that I can make more conscious efforts to reframe what I feel like is a failure. I can confront that thought distortion and actually analyze it for what it is. It was just a thought distortion. A less serious example is that I'm really into plants, but for a really long time I didn't have the confidence to have any plants but succulents because they are perfect for the environment that I live in and thus are hard to kill. And so I didn't want to kill a plant because it would feel like a failure. Inevitably, I killed a plant. That's just how it goes. And the first time I killed that plant, I could have decided that I didn't have the skills to invest more money in more plants. It was going to be a money sink. It was, something I didn't have. I tried it, it didn't work out, and I just have to move on. But I didn't do that. I decided to treat it more like a puzzle instead of like a pass-fail grade in a class. And so now I have been able to learn and grow from these missteps or even just these half steps. And now I have plants that have humidity needs. I have tropical plants. I am growing 2 bonsai trees from seeds, and it's working. It's like I'm some kind of wizard, a tree wizard.
You're a wizard, Dan?
I'm a wizard! Bonsai trees! I did not think that would work out. And I think that is important. I didn't think it would work out, even when I was doing it. I still have those thought distortions. So think about the inside thoughts. The things that only belong to you, not the extenuating circumstances, not, the kid getting sick, not the losing your job, just the inside thoughts that make you quit something. What do those thoughts sound like? Who do those thoughts sound like? Tackling that concept of like where these inside thoughts come from, where your thought distortions stem from, is a really, really important step of meeting your goal, whether it be like sick-ass ghost jiu-jitsu or like I want to get my blood sugar levels to human being levels. Whatever. It's still an important concept, whether your goals are physical, they're spiritual, they're money. What stops you? And how can you stop those thoughts from stopping you?
About a month ago, I wrote a post on our WordPress blog about new beginnings, about setting goals, and the fact that it feels like kind of a risk to expose yourself, sharing your goals with other people. It's something that makes you accountable, and something that, along with the possibility of sharing your success with other people, it also exposes your failures. And I think that the thing that prevents a lot of us from sharing our goals, sharing our ambitions, is this possibility of exposing our failures along with that intent. The thing that is so common about online pagan personas is that we are inclined to only share the brightest, most attention-grabbing moments. We want to share our successes, but we don't want to share all of the messy steps that led up to it. I think that we definitely still feel like some of this is a risk. We don't want to feel like we failed. We don't want to show you that this is something that we shouldn't have even tried. But I think that it's worth making the effort. I think it's worth exposing ourselves as vulnerable and fallible and willing to learn, so that our other listeners, our other queer pagan listeners, can know that it's okay to be vulnerable and willing to fail, but still willing to learn. And that's what makes our success more worth it. That's part of what makes our success so valuable. So, God, how do I wrap this up?
Maybe you did.
Maybe I did. Well, I didn't, but I didn't use a concluding tone. That matters.
Oh no. Oh,
damn
quick.
it. Okay, so the last thing I'm gonna say is, so we thank you for this opportunity to let us show you, let us walk the talk. And we invite you into our Homebrew 2020.
Yeah, Homebrew 2020.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Please rescue me, Danny. I'm so
I'm rescuing
tired of
you.
this
Speaking of
conclusion.
invitations, Johna, do you want to hear a story?
God, yes, please.
Yeah. So the myth for today is the Aztec creation story. This version of the story is found on aztec-history.com. I chose this one for a couple of reasons. I thought it was an engaging way to tell the story. It references 3 reputable sources, but I do want to give the disclaimer that a couple of times in this they will talk about, gender binary. They will talk about the opposites of the world, etc. And these are things that I believe have been filtered through the lens of the modern Western world. I do want to remind everybody that the closest we can get to an accurate telling of any of the Aztec myths and Mayan myths are retellings of the stories that have been written down as heard and interpreted by Catholic monks. That means that bias is implicit in these works. Personally, I think it shows. But we sort of have to take what we can get. And I feel that the other aspects of this story are entertaining and accessible enough that we can sort of, turn the other way for a little bit this time. Have mercy on my pronunciations. I am still learning. I double-checked these through some pronunciation guides and videos on the internet, but, it'd be like that. As a note, this retelling/summary references the following stories: The Eagle on the Cactus, traditional stories from Mexico, adapted by Angel Vigil in 2000. Aztec and Mayan Mythology, the Yale New Haven Teachers Institute curriculum by Diana Doyle. And The Corn Woman, Stories and Legends of the Hispanic Southwest, also by Angel Vigil. The Aztec Creation Story, Rebirth. The story of creation, according to the Aztecs, is actually a story of birth, death, and rebirth. When the world is destroyed, it is born again through the sacrifice of one of the gods, and so through the birth of a new son. So you'll often hear of the legend of the 5 sons, the 5 births of the world. 5 sons, and so 5 different worlds have existed. When the story is told, the order of the worlds is sometimes different. Sometimes there are even less than 5 sons, but the general idea remains the same. But it is not a story of endless cycles, as you may see in other cultures. For the Aztecs, the universe did have an actual beginning. In the beginning was the void. It was at some ancient time in the Aztec creation story that the dual god, Ometecutli, and Omecihuatl created themselves. Looking back, of course, the Aztecs believed that the many opposites that they saw in the world would have to somehow unite in the origin of the world. This god was good and bad, chaos and order, male and female. Being male and female, they were able to have children, and they had four, which came to represent the four directions of north, south, east, and west. These gods were Huitzilopochtli, south, Quetzalcoatl, east, Tezcatlipoca, west, and Xepetotec, north. The directions were very important to the Aztecs since they believed their great empire was at the very center of the universe. In the age of the first sun, the jaguar sun, a great source of energy had to be created. This sun is the key to the cycles in the Aztec creation story. But the sun is so powerful, it can't just be created. It can only come into being through the sacrifice of a god. The god chosen was Tezcatlipoca. Tezcatlipoca only managed to become half a sun, however, making this first creation incomplete. During this first age, the gods created giants from ashes and gave them acorns to eat. A fight began, however, between Quetzalcoatl and Tezcatlipoca. In the end, the sun was knocked from the sky, and in anger, Tezcatlipoca sent jaguars to destroy the giants. In the age of the second sun, the wind sun, Quetzalcoatl took over for his brother as the sun. Humans were created as they are now, normal-sized, and they lived on pinon nuts, and for a while, things were fine. But the people became corrupt, and perhaps out of revenge, Tezcatlipoca turned them into monkeys. Furious, Quetzalcoatl sent a hurricane to blow the monkeys away. In the age of the third sun, the rain sun, Tlaloc was created, one of the early creations of the gods, the god of rain and water. He became the next sun, but his personal problems became his downfall. Once again, Tezcatlipoca was the instigator. Tezcatlipoca stole Tlaloc's wife, Xochiquetzal, and Tlaloc was grief-stricken. He shone as the sun, but refused to send rain in spite of the pleas of the people. Drought swept the earth, and finally, in a rage, Tlaloc made it rain fire, burning away this version of the world. The Aztec creation story continues in the fourth age, the water sun. This time the gods selected Tlaloc's sister to be the sun, but, filled with jealousy, Tezcatlipoca and Quetzalcoatl struck down that sun. As she fell, the sky opened up and water flooded the earth. All things were destroyed again. In the darkness between the suns, Quetzalcoatl descended into the underworld to bring up the bones of the dead. They would be used to bring to life the people who are now here. And, if you recall from earlier episodes, I have talked about that story before. In the age of the fifth sun, the earthquake sun, the proud god Tecuitziztecatl offered himself, but the other gods preferred the humble Nanahuatzin. A great fire was built, but Tecuitziztecatl was too afraid at the last minute to jump in. However, Nanahuatzin did jump. Filled with jealousy, Tecuitziztecatl jumped in after, followed by a brave eagle and a jaguar. And so 2 suns began to rise in the east, but it was too bright. The gods threw a rabbit into the face of Tecuitziztecatl to dim the light, and he became the moon. But Nanahuatzin was weak. He was motionless, so the other gods had to give their blood to give him the energy to run across the sky. This is the world in which we now live. The Aztecs believed its end would come in massive earthquakes. I really liked this myth because I liked this concept of not just cycles, but like ages. Almost like in Lord of the Rings, if I may. There was like a first age, a second age, a third age. And I thought that it would be kind of funny and appropriate while we are remembering Christopher Tolkien to make those kinds of connections that I'm sure he would not appreciate to his father's work. I think it's sweet to me, but it's probably snotty to literally everyone else.
All right, whatever. Good old
it's
Chris.
Fine. Old Chris will just have to live. Or,
You know what?
you know.
What I liked about it was, the accounting of time. That it was cyclical. That the intent was to have someone seated as the sun, and they knew that it was necessary, but also that they had encountered numerous failures and roadblocks, and they just kept trying it. They just kept fucking doing it.
Yeah. And there's this like concept that perhaps like Aztec religion allows for the like possibility of different universes, like a multiverse deal, which doesn't really surprise me. There's a lot of things that would sound quite modern if you were talking about Aztec society, and so it wouldn't like be super out of character for them to be like somewhat to kind of have a budding understanding of essentially multiverse theory. I'd buy that. So yeah, cool shit. Neat. Tell me your thoughts.
Oh my gosh. Okay, that's my cue for the devotional thought. Oh, okay. Goodness, thinking about those timelines, thinking about how it's worth trying, even though you failed so many times. I know that my earlier example of ghost punching was pretty unserious, but I'm going to tell you about how this process has already been of benefit to me, specifically in regards to connecting to and venerating my ancestors. So while I feel that I have a good relationship with my gods, who, by the way, are not the gods of my ancestors because Africa is not a monolith, while I'm comfortable with them, I am less confident with discerning the will of my ancestors. So some months ago, I decided on the goal of improving that relationship. In the past several weeks, I've been mostly in the observation stage of determining how often I pray to my ancestors, what I talk to them about, and I realized really quickly that my tendency was to approach them formally or not at all. So now it makes sense. Like, of course they felt distant. I was the one keeping my distance. And, maybe that's because I don't feel that I can trust a lot of my living family. Maybe that's because I already feel like an outsider because a lot of my living family treats queerness as an embarrassment. It's probably a combination of a lot of things. But recognizing that made me try to face my discomfort head on by just trying to pray more often. Seeing how much I do it in a week, and then maybe add on one more prayer. Maybe add on two. So I would just give thanks if I couldn't think of anything else to say. I started using my personal journal to draw pictures of the offerings I'd like to give them, even if I wasn't able to give them in real life. I started keeping a list of accomplishments that I was personally proud of, so that I could remember to invite my ancestors into the moments when I wanted to celebrate. For a while, this felt, sort of one-sided, like I was just going through the motions, trying to get comfortable with it, and still feeling uncomfortable, but it kind of caught up to me without looking, like that castle balcony that I took for granted, and then all of a sudden I was standing there. Suddenly, I knew to turn to them when I was faced with an immediate crisis, when I needed to feel sure of how to act in a tough situation, when I wasn't sure that my bank account could support the kind of help that I needed at the time. And wouldn't you know that I could feel my ancestors direct me to knowledgeable, relatable people. Suddenly, I could find that even though there were some costs I couldn't avoid, they weren't crippling. That's really just the beginning. I'm still working on this, but now that I have a better idea of what I can expect from myself, this is starting to feel already like it's not something outside of my control. Like this is manageable. Like this is something that I can dramatically improve within just the next couple months, let alone a full year. At this point, it's January. I'm still just a few weeks in. I'm not quite toward where I can, set more concrete goals. Being able to turn to them when I'm trying to do serious divination, I still need practice. I still need some more training and some work. I still need to turn to these other, more knowledgeable people so that I can get instruction. But what I have been able to accomplish has been incredibly meaningful. And days that I don't pray to them don't feel like failures anymore. I feel like they trust me to come back when I'm able to. So that's my takeaway. I would encourage you to keep trying, keep going, think of the Aztecs, I guess. It's still a worthy goal.
Hey, there you go.
So with all of that being said, I think I'd like to close this with my question for you guys. What are your goals for this year?
Hell yeah.
Oh my god, Danny, back me
I'm sorry. Go wild within reason. Tell me what you want to do. We always look forward to hearing from you, and we would love to kind of be a part of a goal-setting community.
Yeah, we're rooting for you, you guys.
Yeah.
Like, whether you're using this kind of plan or not, we are rooting for your success.
Take us out.
Oh, so thanks so much for joining us this week, you guys. Remember to subscribe and share Homebrew Podcast with anyone else looking for queer pagan content. You can find Homebrew on iTunes, Spotify, and wherever you like to get your podcasts. Look out for new episodes every other Friday.
A big thank you to Vexento for the use of our theme song, We Are One, and to the Miracle Forest for the background, The Magical Tearoom.
Again, you can send your comments and experiences to us on Tumblr and Twitter with hashtag HomebrewPagans.
We are at homebrewpodcast.tumblr.com and at HomebrewPagans on Twitter. Also, look out for updates on our site, homebrewpodcast.home.blog. Thanks, everyone, and we'll talk to you real soon.